So, chapter 303. Yeah, that was a setup for what's to come, especially what's coming in 304. Especially if we focus on the last line that All Might says. Because in actuality, that ties into a theory that I have about One for All and All Might's connection. And in this video, I want to talk about that connection and my theory for why All Might is not inside of One for All. So let's talk about it right after the intro. Hit it. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Big Blue Drew 97 here, coming at you with a discussion video, this time discussing chapter 303 and a particular theory that I had in mind pertaining to All Might and his connection to One for All. And before we get more into it, this isn't something that I really do a whole lot of. I don't really do a whole lot of discussion videos. So to those who are watching this video, if you like this type of content, leave a like on the video as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel so I know that this is the type of content that you want to see more of in the future. And without the way, I want to get right into the discussion and the theory about chapter 303 and what it will entail for what's going to be going on in chapter 304 as well as the rest of the manga pertaining to All Might and his connection to One for All. So for starters, let's go right into exactly what All Might said in the last part of this chapter and the general idea that it has to the theory that I have that I'm going to explain a little bit later. And basically what he says is that he can feel it. He can feel that Deku is basically talking to the previous users of One for All in the Vestige world. And that's very interesting because when I first read that, I kind of thought that that was like the end of my theory. My theory basically tackles the idea for why Deku is able to see, for the most part, all of the vestiges inside of One for All except for All Might, and why All Might appears as this black or this flame-like figure. And I thought that that line basically discredited everything about my theory. But then I started to remember a few things about the story, and in actuality, it does make sense for why All Might said what he said, because it also relates to something else that another character said as well. So, All Might says that he can feel Deku talking to the other users of All for One, and you may be thinking, well, if he can feel it, doesn't that mean that he's actually inside the quirk of One for All? Well, no, not necessarily, because not only was All Might one of the very few that could actually sense it, but he's not the only one, because you also have one All for One who is also able to sense One for All. We also know that All for One has a play in the creation of One for All, and because of this, he may have a direct connection with it. Because in chapter 209 in My Hero Academia, we have this one line from All for One, who basically says that he can hear his little brother. And this is very important because this comes before the reveal that Deku, who's able to communicate with the other vestiges of One for All, is able to do so and use those quirks. He was able to hear his brother before Deku was able to communicate with him. And this could imply that because of his connection with it, he can hear the people, or specifically his little brother, inside of the quirk for One for All, meaning that you don't have to have your consciousness passed on to the quirk to hear it. And because I thought about that, that still allows for my theory about the reasoning why All Might is still in that flame vestige, like why his consciousness may not be a part of One for All, but he's still able to see it because he's had that connection with the quirk. So he may not be a part of it, but he can still hear it. And now that I've brought that point up, I want to really get right into the theory, which, like I said, mainly pertains to the reasoning why All Might may not be inside of the quirk of One for All. So we know 5 of the 9 users of All for One. We know Deku, who is the 9th user. We know Toshinori All Might, who was the 8th user. We know Nana Shimura, who was the 7th user. We know who the 5th user was, which is Daijo Banjo, and we know the 1st user, who is the younger brother of All For One, also known as the younger Shigaraki brother. We know that they were the users of One For All, but among all of them, Deku was only able to see Nana, the younger Shigaraki brother, Banjo, as well as the 6th and 4th user very clearly. He was only able to see the silhouettes of the 2nd and 3rd user, but as well as able to see the 1st user as well. But every time we see them, All Might is always in this sort of flaming state. When we first see them all clearly, we can see them clearly except for the 2nd, 3rd user, but All Might is always in the flame. And even when they're all lined up, when we were able to still see the silhouettes of the 2nd and 3rd user, All Might was still shrouded in that flaming substance. And I think that the reasoning behind that is because his consciousness was not passed on to the quirk of One For All. And the reasoning why I don't think that he's actually inside of One For All is because Toshinori, All Might, was quirkless. And because he was quirkless, that means that he doesn't have a quirk factor. Because if we remember in chapter 287, that is when we realize that consciousness of a quirk user lives inside the quirk, or specifically the quirk factor, and when that is passed on to someone else, part of that person's consciousness is also passed on. And we also know that One For All is able to stockpile power, which includes the quirk and most likely the quirk factor. But because if that is the case, then it cannot have the consciousness of All Might, because All Might was born quirkless. And even though he eventually gained the quirk from Nana, because it didn't bond with his own inherent quirk factor, it means that he physically cannot pass on his consciousness because he didn't have a quirk to begin with. And like I said before, he appears in this flame corporeal state, meaning that most likely he's just going to be a part of the quirk of One For All, and he may not be able to communicate with Deku. And this could have major implications on Deku as well as All Might later on in the future, because that would mean that when All Might inevitably dies, there will be no way for Deku to be able to get more guidance and be able to communicate with him if his consciousness was not passed on to the quirk. Which means that unlike with Shigaraki, where All For One Shigaraki, gosh, that's going to be confusing, when All For One still lives inside of the quirk All For One inside of Shigaraki and would still be able to try and control him and mentor him from the inside, Deku would have to grow on his own without his mentor, without All Might, because he would have no way of being able to deal with him. And if All Might is gone completely, that would be more impactful, because it would mean that there was no way that anyone could ever talk to him. So if he dies of mysterious circumstances, or he dies without anyone around him, he will be alone in his last moments, and he would have no way to communicate with anyone, and Deku would have to handle that burden and have that burden weigh on his shoulders moving forward in the story. So yeah, that's basically the gist of the theory, and why I think that in next chapter we'll basically either confirm this theory or completely make it wrong. So I'm very hoping that this theory is correct, because there's a lot of interesting things that can come from it, and there's evidence in the story showing that that is a possible explanation for why All Might only exists in this flame form. And I could be wrong, and if I'm not wrong, that would be fun. So yeah, that's all I really want to talk about. And once again, let me sum up everything that I basically said. The reasoning why All Might is in that flame-like form is because he was unable to fully pass on a quirk factor into One For All, and his consciousness with that, because he lacks a quirk factor because he was quirkless. So most likely we'll see if that is confirmed next chapter. But so yeah, that's all I really have to say about this theory. If you liked it, leave a like in this video so I know that you like this type of content. Maybe I can have more theories, maybe I can make more theory videos. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below, as well. Leave a like on this video, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel, Big Blue Drew 97. What did you think of the theory? Do you like it? Do you think it's right? Do you think it's wrong? Gosh, leave your comments down below and do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. So until then, goodbye!